Hey everybody, KC here. So you may remember a couple of weeks ago we had a morning newsbeat reader who wrote in to complain about the fact that he felt he was being surveyed too much by the businesses that he was patronizing. I find that fascinating because, if anything, I think I'm surveyed too little especially by retailers that I'm doing business with. I hardly ever am asked for my opinion. So I ended up having an offline conversation with Doug Maddenberg, who is the Chief Listening Officer at the Feedback Group. And we had a conversation about it, and I really thought it was worth talking about this on Morning Newsbeat, because he has a really interesting perspective on this. It's not that consumers are being surveyed too much or too little, it's really that they're being surveyed badly. And if you survey them well, you ask the right questions, and you really listen to the answers, you can learn an awful lot, and it can turn into profit. So anyway, we decided to do the conversation on Morning Newsbeat. So I hope you enjoy my conversation with Doug Maddenberg, Chief Listening Officer at the Feedback Group. Well, Doug Maddenberg, welcome to Morning Newsbeat.
Great to be with you. Long time listener, as they say.
Always makes you feel like sports radio when people say that, and I actually love it. This call comes out of, we connected about this coming out of the email that I received from a Morning Newsbeat reader who was, just felt he was tired of being surveyed about everything. And you reacted to that. And basically not to overly summarize what you said to me, was that problem is not being surveyed, not that he's being surveyed too much. It is that he's being surveyed badly. Am I saying that right?
Yeah, it's that I think by and large, most of the surveys that are out there are only for the benefit, or the perceived benefit is for the store. Whereas the really good surveys, the perceived benefit is on the part of the shopper.
Right. It's, and it was funny because my reaction to that email was that I hardly ever get surveyed. I mean, and I'm a regular customer / visitor, at retailers ranging from Stop and Shop to Wegmans to Stu Leonard's, Palmer's, which is a local independent. I occasionally go to ShopRite, Whole Foods. So, I spread my business around it, that I'm certainly visiting all those stores and buying a few things on a regular basis. And I can't even tell you the last time I got surveyed by anybody in that group. And I'm not just picking on them. I suspect that is a national, that is typical of what goes on out there.
It is typical, and we found that only 43%, the last time we did the survey, our national study, only 43% of grocery shoppers agree that their own supermarket seeks my feedback about the store and my shopping experiences. Only 43%.
That's really low. Now, when you're talking, I'm sort of interested because it's sort of like a chicken and egg thing here, right? Because you help retail, any business, I assume, but retailers survey their customers to find out what they like and don't like about the shopping experience. But that must put you in very close touch with what makes a good shopping experience and what makes a bad shopping experience. So let's start with the second part first. But when you're talking to customers, what do they prize? What do they value? And what are the things that may not matter as much as retailers think they do?
Yeah, and actually, just to finish out that last point about retailers that seek feedback, when we do the math and we figure out the net promoter score, or the advocacy of shoppers where their store seeks their feedback, their net promoter score for those stores is a 69 versus a 25 for the ones that don't. So not only it really does matter to a shopper whether or not their store is listening to their own feedback and responding to it. So
I'm gonna have to hold for a second. This is embarrassing. My dog just woke up and wants to be let out of the office. Hold on one second.
no problem.
This is live television, baby. And Morning Newsbeat readers are used to dogs wandering around behind me when I'm outside. So anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, fair enough. So, there's a kind of a few ways to measure the shopping experience, and one of the most important ways to do it is what we like it's a visit specific survey where a shopper is asked about their most recent visit to the store, and they're given several questions about the experience. And I think, as you pointed out in your point of view, it shouldn't be too long for sure, but it really should cover some of the basics, and then it should also cover some of the more, what we call the next level experience factors as well. So, there's kind of a mix of those. And I loved your thought process about asking a few questions and then seeing if the shopper has time to answer some more to get more detail about the experience.
So so I mean everything I've ever seen is that fresh food, the most important thing, great produce. I mean, I assume that your surveys there's no change in that in terms of how people think.
There's not. And I think that when we look at what we call the core experience factors, and so the quality and freshness of the food or the cleanliness of the store, the friendliness of the personnel, the checkout experience, all of those various, key items are all relatively held in well regard by shoppers about their last visit to their grocery store. So you won't get that much differentiation when you're looking at those basic factors. But we sort of have learned which items really do differentiate a great experience from just a good one, or a good one from a bad one for sure. And one of the most important questions that a retailer can ask is, on this visit, were we in stock on everything that you wanted to buy? That is a super important question to ask, because with the companies where we ask that question, and in our national survey as well, we find that there's a huge difference. The biggest difference in overall satisfaction with the visit is on that one question: was I able to come in? Was I able to purchase everything that I wanted to buy? Was the store in stock? So much so that when you look at, and by the way, 80% of shoppers would say that their store was in stock on everything they wanted to purchase, and
Really?
20% said they're not.
I'm shocked that it's that high. That
Yeah,
in fact, again, I'm not questioning the survey. I'm wondering what that, I can't even remember. I mean, it's very few supermarkets that I go to on a regular basis that are in stock on everything. Now, maybe my experience is different because I'm looking at the shelves differently than if I'm a customer. Although even when I go to a store and I'm thinking like a customer because I'm doing the shopping, I'm amazed sometimes by the holes and not just holes. These are like canyon-like gaps in this where there's nothing there. And in my experience, locally for me, Stop and Shop is terrible, and amazingly, Whole Foods is terrible. That I just think that I'm amazed by the out of stocks and the rationale always seems to be, oh no, there's supply chain issues out there. No, not anymore. Not the same way they were. I think that's become a crutch for retailers. I think it's bad buying, or what I like to call is I don't give a damn disease. I'm not sure which.
yeah, and it's certainly that number has come up in the last few years, given some of the supply chain issues and
Yeah,
shortages
sure.
that we had the past few years. But what's interesting is that among the people who said, yes, the store was in stock and everything I wanted to buy, their average overall satisfaction with the visit was 4.43. That's on a scale of 1 to 5. So it's a pretty high overall
Yeah.
satisfaction, versus only a 3.97 if you were not in stock on everything I wanted to buy. That's the biggest difference we find across any of the questions we ask on the survey.
Yeah. I mean, just competitively, and this is probably not accounted for in the survey, but it seems to me that if it lowers, if I'm a shopper and my reaction to a store is lower because they didn't have everything they didn't have everything I wanted in stock. The other problem is I have to go to another store to get that stuff, which opens the door for that second store to keep me as a customer. It's not just about, oh, they didn't have it. You're dealing potentially with the loss of a shopper at least in terms of most stuff they're buying.
Especially because of the number of people who are shopping multiple stores these days, right? So if you're going to lose that shopper because they weren't able to find the item, chances are they're going to other stores, both in store and online, for their to meet their grocery shopping needs. And yes, you are in risk of losing that business going forward.
I'm curious, hadn't thought about this before, but you mentioned checkout. How many complaints do you get from customers about self-checkout? Because that's been a big, there's been like this massive, not massive, but there's been a lot of people saying, self-checkout's on the way out. And I just don't see it. I think 40% of, I mean, my reaction has always been, bet you 40% of customers love it, 40% of customers hate it, and 20% of customers will do whatever the line is shortest. I'm going to find out now that my numbers are very different than yours, I suspect.
No, it's definitely it's one of those hot button issues, right? So disproportionate number of comments about the issue relative to the ratings themselves and the number who are
Okay.
using self-checkout. But what we do find is that, and I agree with you, I think a store has to have both options because there are different, needs for each shopping trip. Um, but when we look at the numbers in terms of NPS, we know that if you use a cashier lane, your NPS for a store is much higher than if you use self-checkout lane, just because you have the ability with that cashier to really further and cement that relationship.
Doesn't that presume that the cashier is any good?
1000%.
Maybe the quality of cashiers around in supermarkets around the country is much better than I thought. Which in some ways is a relief. I mean, I think they're very. I mean, I think they're for me in a lot of companies. They're few and far between. Do you find a cashier who adds to the experience?
I would agree with that. And I think what the data show is that when you do find somebody like that, it has an enormous impact on your relationship with the store.
Hmm. So okay, so these are the things that matter in terms of what customers are paying attention to. But when you come down to asking them about these things, and you started to talk about it before, it has always seemed to me, and this may be part of what annoyed the reader who wrote in about this stuff, was that when questions are asked by a business of a shopper, they sometimes seem very self-serving. And I'm not even thinking of a retailer, but Michael Sansola wrote a column years ago about buying a car, and then they say to you, "Well, listen, you're going to get a survey, but do us a favor. If you're not going to give us fives on everything, don't give us anything because the only thing that a four is as bad as a one." And it's like, well, that's nuts. You're really not trying to learn, right?
Yeah, there's a lot in that observation that I agree with, from the types of questions that are asked to the scoring methodology that's used, whether you use that sort of top box as you're referring to versus something that's a little more balanced. Um, that's kind of beyond the scope, but I would certainly agree that there are ways to make the customer feel as if this is a listening exercise that benefits them because you're listening, you're paying attention, and when the customer asks for a response, you're actually responding. That's such a key part of the program. And a lot of retailers fall down there. They don't have the ability or the follow through to get back in touch with customers that say, yeah, I'd like you to contact me about the feedback, because, at the end of the day, this business is just one relationship at a time. And I think we always encourage retailers to look at these surveys more than just a survey, but as a relationship tool. This is how you're supposed to interact with customers in ways that are important to them.
I wonder if one of the reasons, whether you're a CEO of a big company, CEO of a small independent or a regional, or just even a store manager or a regional manager, if one of the reasons they don't, pick up the phone and call the customer is because they haven't been taught how to talk to customers, right? I mean, it takes some skill to be able to pick up the phone and say, "Hey, I read your comments, and thanks for the nice things you said, but you pointed these other things out. Let's talk about that. I need to understand it more so we can make it better." I wonder how many of these people actually have that skill set.
Yeah, it takes an emotional intelligence to deal with customers just as it does to deal with employees. And you're right, that's the differentiator. The good companies or the good stores within companies have managers or assistant managers or directors of customer or customer service managers who can actually do that well. But I think most stores will tell me it's not necessarily about the lack of skill, it's about the lack of time. And that's something we really need to figure out as an industry, how we apportion the time that we that a store manager or a service manager spends actually with customers with issues like this, rather than doing paperwork, checking reports, doing things that are not customer value added.
Well, I'm listen, I'm just a poor country pundit, but um, I can't imagine there's time that could be better spent. I mean, that would be my reaction. What do you mean you don't have time to talk to customers? Right?
Totally agree.
What could you do that's more important than that?
And so if you should always be taking 10 or 15 minutes a day to interact with customers. If you run a store, and that could be, responding to survey responses. If you have a survey program in place, it could be walking to the store, handing out your business card, and you've seen it as a customer. The independent retailers are especially, or can be especially good at this. It's that nature of understanding that the business is about relationships that I think really differentiate the good stores. And by the way, I think it's also, those are the things that differentiate a good survey, kind of getting back to what we were originally talking about, over one that just seems so average. When we ask surveys, we don't just talk about the basic core experience factors. We like retailers to ask about what we call the next level differentiators, right? So we've got a series of questions that we encourage retailers to ask about food expertise, for example, right? This, at the end of the day, it's about food. We're shopping for food. We're not shopping for another commodity. And so we like our clients to ask their customers, do you agree that we're passionate about food? Do you think we carry, items that are delicious and can't be bought elsewhere? In other words, a signature item. Do we carry enough local products for you? Do we have food expertise? These are the kinds of things that I think I would call a next level differentiator. And scores across the country don't score as well, nearly as well, in those next level factors as they do in the core.
Well, I think part of the problem is that most retailers, even in the food business, and there are a lot of exceptions, obviously, don't think of themselves as being in the food business. They're in the margin business, the real estate business, the bag, bottle, and jar business, and box business. They don't
And
think,
now you can add the advertising business.
and now the advertising business, and they don't think of themselves as being in the food business. Now, I'm just curious. A question I would add to the ones that you just mentioned is, I might say, a question I would wonder if this would work. What's the best tasting thing you've bought from us in the last month?
Love it. Great
Right?
question.
And it might be in fresh, it might be some sauce or some, or what's it, because I think it always seems to me that if you can get that granular,
You
it
you
it starts
can
to tell you something.
you can and you should. There's so many ways to reach out to customers and get their feedback, that you absolutely should be getting that granular if it's that important. And then that's on the food side. On the people side, we ask next level questions like, I feel like this store cares about its employees. I mean, the employees enjoy working there.
Right.
The store helps take care of the community. These are the kinds of things that, you know, differentiate a a really high functioning store from the Aldi or the Walmart that has lower prices, for sure.
Yeah. So, one of the things that I had talked about in my commentary was the idea of, you can ask them 3 or 4 questions and then say, and I get these kinds of surveys I get from like airlines all the time, right? Which is, they ask me 5 questions and say, hey, listen, if you've got another 5 minutes, we have some more questions. And sometimes I'll do it and sometimes I won't. Again, not a technique I've seen with a lot of by a lot of, food retailers or even retailers in general.
Yeah, and some are starting to use that. And the thing that a food retailer can and should do is have some sort of a participation incentive.
Right.
because so they're able to say, look, so we're going to choose 5 $100 gift cards from all of the survey responses for this month. And that's really important because not only does it improve the response rate, which it does, but the primary reason for doing that is because you want the set of responses to mirror the full set of shopping experiences to the extent they can, not just be the people who are really satisfied or really dissatisfied.
How important is it? Again, like I'm always convinced when I get a survey from United Airlines, everybody on my flight got a survey, and maybe everybody who flew that, or maybe everybody who flies United Airlines is getting a survey.
Yeah.
How important? And listen, retailers have thousands and thousands of people going through their stores. How important is it to be very deliberate about picking a subset of that? Like, let's survey this week, let's survey everybody who spent more than $200 in the store, which might only be 12 people, might be 112 people, but you're being specific and you can target the survey towards these big basket customers. And then maybe the opposite of that is to pick a subset. Let's pick the people who bought the fewest items but then craft the survey in a way that allows us to figure out, do we have the ability here to turn them into a bigger basket shopper?
Absolutely. We're working with loyalty providers that work with our clients and and integrating the survey sort of invitation algorithm to reflect what's going on with the shopper behavior and spend in each category. But the other thing you can do on the back end is segment the responses by top shoppers and opportunity shoppers, et cetera. And you absolutely should do that to see where the differences are and where you can grow the top line.
Yeah. And obviously you don't survey everybody on every trip they make. I mean, it just seems to me that it makes sense to be really, really deliberate and surgical about figuring out what you want to know, who the customer is who can provide that information the best, and then not go into the well too many times.
Right. You certainly don't want to make people feel as if they're getting too many touch points from you
Right.
about that. But you do want to give them the opportunity when they want to provide feedback to you. 'Cause remember, it's about them, not about the retailer. So it's important to give the shoppers the chance to get in touch with you when they feel like they want to or need to.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's really important for the audience to underline that point, that the question where it is asking is not rate your visit, because that's retailer centric. It's really more of tell us how we can serve you better, which is more about me as a shopper.
That should be the connection.
Yeah, yeah. And I always think the other question, and this is the hard one, I suppose, is, man, just go to again a subset, but then ask the question, how do we tell me one way in which we disappointed you.
An-
I mean,
Another great question, right? So there's lots of interesting ways that you can position it so that you're kind of cutting through, right? What you're suggesting there is to get past the okay and go check boxes and radio buttons and give us some quantitative feedback, but really getting to the core of what's on your mind. It's really important for surveys to include the ability to give positive feedback if somebody wants to, and kudos to an employee. And by the way, that's a great use of a survey program, is to spread that information around and make sure that it's celebrated. And also for people to follow up on things that where the retailer may have dropped the ball.
yeah. I'm again, I'm not even an amateur. I'm a spectator on this, but I've always kind of thought that, rather than sending out a survey, which might have 5 questions, maybe they have 50 questions. I mean, depending on how well they're doing their survey, that it makes sense and sometimes it would make sense just to have a simple email, maybe from the CEO of the company, again, to a subset. Maybe it's your best customers. Maybe you pick your 100 best customers and everybody gets what appears to be a personal email from whoever saying, I just want to thank you for being a great shopper. It's your loyalty to us, makes it all possible. But now I want to ask you I want to ask you I want to ask you a hard question, and and that is, have we disappointed you? And not even making a survey in the traditional sense, but it's more I can use your guidance.
There are all kinds of feedback tools out there that enable a retailer to do that. And that's a great example. I would encourage retailers not just to do that from the namesake of the company, but also really each store. Each store manager should be skilled at doing that, and spend 15 minutes of their time each day walking around the store asking that exact same question.
Yeah. I've always thought, it's funny. And I've said this on Morning Newsbeat 1,000 times probably, is that, you know, every, you ought to be able to go to every store manager and say, who are your best 10 customers? And they ought to be able to and if they don't have an answer for that question, their boss ought to say, okay, you got a week. And then those store managers ought to be able to go to their department managers and say to the guy in the meat department, who are your best 10 customers? The people you see all the time. And they ought to be able to answer that question. And by the way, and that can go, and that becomes, if you don't know that and you're not reaching out to those people on a regular basis, sometimes just to say thank you. You don't even have to ask them a question. And you can send them a freebie or a coupon, or maybe not even all the time, or invite them to a wine party or something. There's lots of ways to do it depending on the kind of retailer you are.
Yeah.
But if you're not identifying those people on a regular basis and reaching out to them regularly to get, again, to use the name of your company, that get feedback, not necessarily through a survey, but to create open lines of communication, it just seems to me to be such a lost opportunity.
I think what you're suggesting is being able to use the available data and tools that are out there in order to further the cause of the human element. And I think with all the technology that's available to stores and store leaders, that ought to be the end goal for each of those tools.
Yeah. Yeah. And yes. And I love what you just said. And that's probably a great place to finish, which is the data is great and the technology is great. But if they're not there to support the human element, then they're just buttons and they're bytes, and they really don't matter that much.
Completely agree.
Okay. And Doug, I really appreciate this. This was fun. I will make sure that I provide your contact information to people so they can reach out to you, because again, I feel passionately, just based on my experience, that this is not something this industry does enough of, and does not do and does not do it well enough, even when they're doing it. So I hope they reach out to you to figure out how to make it work better.
Thank you. It's my passion as well. So I look forward to doing that.
Take care. Thanks so much.
Thank you.